1, 2.
Check, check. It's malfunctioning. Let's turn this off. Check 1 2, mic check 1 2. Check 1 2, mic check 1 2. Check 1 2. Check 1 2, mic check 1 2. Check 1 2. Check 1 2 3. Okay. Take off the headphones. Oh, I see what's going on here. Okay. Check 1 2, mic check 1 2. How about now? Can you hear that? Check 1 2, mic check 1 2. Okay, cool. You okay? You're hearing okay? Yeah, no problem. Okay. Check 1 2, mic check 1 2.
good evening, everyone. My name is John Roll. I am the president of the New Hampshire chapter of the IMA. Tonight, we're here to talk about testing. Well, okay. I don't like using microphones. Yeah, let me. All right. Can you guys hear me okay then? I am actually a CMA, not a CPA, and a CFM. Both certifications I got through the IMA. They no longer have the CFM, but the CMA is a Certified Professional Managerial. Before we get going, I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about our chapter, about the IMA, and kind of what it is. So the IMA, the Institute of Management Accountants, we're a global network. We're about 100,000 strong. We're in multiple countries, 4 regional and global offices, about 300 chapters. New Hampshire itself is a whole chapter, about 120 of us. We come from, we're not all accountants. We have different people. We have people from HR. We have people, some from the insurance industry. We have, academic, people from academia in it. We have CPAs in it. We have some people that from health industry in it. So it's really kind of a unique group. It's actually kind of fun because you never know who, when you go to a meeting, who you're going to be sitting next to and what they're going to be talking about. But the IMA itself is the organization that sponsors the CMA, and they now have a global footprint. One of the interesting things about the CMA compared to the CPA is the CPA usually, I believe you still have state requirements, correct? The CMA, once you have it, it's global. The CMA in New Hampshire is the same as the CMA in Canada, in China, in Europe. Once you pass, you pass. You don't have to worry about additional requirements. What do we do in the IMA? Where do we all work? Well, I'm a site controller. I have a staff of 5. The site I work for is a company called Benchmark Electronics. I'm out of Nashua. Our site has 310 people. It's a publicly traded $2.2 billion company. That's me. There are some of our other members that are at smaller firms. Might be a company with about 25 employees. Could be larger companies. All different things. And we're anywhere from a senior accountant to a staff accountant to VP of Finance to myself as a site controller. All different sides. Again, it kind of makes us a little bit special why we do. I think tonight's really important because as a hiring manager, I have a staff of 5. None of them are clerical. They're all professional. All the clerical work is done at what we call the shared service site, and believe it or not, a lot of that's being automated. I'm hoping you guys have heard of RPA, Robotic Process Interface. Have any of you heard of this yet? Okay. Something you're going to want to look up. Basically what it does is we can get an invoice, regular invoice sent in to us for accounts payable. The bot will go out, read it, scan it, put it into our ERP system, match it, and get it ready to pay, and then scan it into a data collection site. So that way we basically have one person that has to push a button in the morning, and that's what it does. And that's what's going to happen. That's why my staff is all professionals. But as professionals, so I'm going to hire. What am I looking for? I'm looking for a certification, whether it be a CMA, whether it be a CPA. I want to see a certification. I want to see that you as a student have gone above and beyond just getting your degree. You're doing something else. You're showing mastery in your field. So that's kind of my own, but I think there's a lot of other hiring managers that might agree with that. I just kind of spoke briefly about some of the new technologies, the trends. I was reading this before I came over here that they say the accounting profession is going to have some severe disruption. There's always going to be the public side. We're always going to have taxes. We're always going to have audit. I deal a lot with audit where I currently work. But the new data, the new business analytics, as I said, the RPA, the blockchain, all these things that are coming in. And if you get into a bigger corporation, you decide to go public and then you go into a private, you get in these bigger corporations, there's all this new technology that's coming out that I think is, one, it's just really incredible because it gets you into more interesting stuff. Who wants to sit there and match entries or look at invoices all day when you can sit there and you can look at big data and do some analysis and talk to your managers about, well, a good example is today. I spent a couple hours today trying to figure out with the Vice President of Operations, how do we better get flow through our factory? So essentially what it'll do is it'll, at the end of the day, make more money, because that's why we're here for. We're going to talk about CPA and how you can test for it, everything that Samantha talks about is applicable to the CMA, either exam. You know, there's different content, but I think the methods are, I think you can use them for both. And finally, what I want to talk about real quickly is just the New Hampshire chapter. 120 strong, 4 to 5 meetings a year. We're part of the New England Northeast Regional Council, and they also have events. It's a great group. We tend to meet here in Manchester at the Puritan, and we usually have discounted rates for students. I understand there's usually a fair number of students who come to our June ethics session. And that will be having this. Our next event after this is actually over in the at the Seacoast, where we're talking about nonprofits. So before I introduce our speakers tonight, I want to call up Ashley. She's part of the New Hampshire Society of CPAs Young Professionals. She wants to say a few things. So, Ashley.
I'm a CPA, so I don't like microphones or stages. Yeah. So I am with the YPs and for the New Hampshire Society of CPAs. I've been a CPA for 3 years now, and I work for a certified public accounting firm in Concord, New Hampshire, called Nathan Wexler. I just wanted to talk about a few of the things that the society offers, that if it is a route that you're thinking about doing, there's a lot of benefits to being a member. I highly suggest that you go ahead and sign up through the website. It's free for students. There's a lot of resources on there, including careers. We do a mentorship program, so if you're a sophomore or a junior, you're not quite sure what you want to do, we do a program that you meet with either a CPA. We also have non-CPAs on the board that you can meet with, and they just go through your resume, they practice your interviewing skills, and they will give different advice. Another thing that they offer is there's internships and job postings on the website, and they do a career fair every year in September that I recommend you check out. And you can also post resumes on their website for jobs. Additionally, they work with Wiley Becker for the Cpa exam for different help, and each year they also award a yearly scholarship. So again, highly recommend you go sign up. And then our next event is actually April 23rd, and it's held at the New Hampshire Society's main office in Manchester. And it's from 5 to 7, and you're just going to learn more about what's the transition from college to career, and different advice that you're looking for from different CPAs. And yeah, I don't have as much impressive stuff to go over as him, but I highly recommend checking out the CPA track as well as the CMA. They're both awesome tracks, and will put you on the road to a great career. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. One final thing I have to do so I don't forget. I want to thank the SNU Accounting Society for the pizza. Very important. Thank you so much. All right. So now a little bit about our two panelists, and then we'll let them go. We've got about 50 minutes between the two of them. If it ends a little sooner, we'll have more time for Q&A. And I'm sure after, if any of you have any questions for me, just come find me. I'll be here. So Samantha Bailey, as you know, was a graduate here at SNU in 2018 with her BS in accounting. She went and completed her MS in professional accountancy and graduated in August of 2019, and now she works at Barry Dunn in Manchester as a staff auditor. Samantha passed all 4 parts of the CPA exam during her 1-year graduate school. That's really impressive. And Tom Kay, sorry, Tom, I don't want to mess up your name. Tom's the regional director for Wiley Efficient Learning in New England. Tom's been involved in professional education for 13 years. Previously, the majority of Tom's career was in retail marketing operations, working with Staples, the office superstore. While travel, Tom has worked in 15 states, coast to coast, lived and worked internationally in Germany and in the UK. Tom's also a pilot, commercially rated pilot and certified flight instructor, and spent several years in higher education as an instructor and adjunct professor. When it comes to high-stakes certification exams, CPA, CMA, and others, Tom considers himself a method actor. That is to say, to do it is to know it. Accordingly, when he started the industry, despite not having an accounting degree, or well, really not any, he only had 9 hours of accounting classes in, he went and sat and passed one section of the CPA exam. I think that's really impressive. So, those are your two speakers for tonight. Now, Samantha, I guess I will turn it over to you.
I'm also very short, so I needed to adjust this squeaky microphone. Well, hi everybody. My name is Samantha. As you all just heard, I graduated from the +1 Master's in Professional Accountancy program in August, and I work currently at a CPA firm in Manchester called Barry Dunn as a staff auditor. So I started working there in September, and I'm here to talk to all of you about strategies that I use to pass the CPA exam. So just a little agenda of what I'm going to go over today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the CPA exam and what it is and what it consists of. I'm going to talk to you about study budgets, so what I used, what I utilized when I was studying for the exams. I'm going to talk a little bit about Wiley. I'll talk about strategies that I used in answering multiple choice questions, and also strategies that I used in answering task-based simulation questions. And I kind of broke it up to talk about tips for studying and tips for taking the real exam. And then I'll just end with some final general tips. So I'm pretty sure that most people in this room know what the CPA exam is, if you're here. So I listed the 4 exams in the order on this slide that I took them. So I started with Reg, and then I took BEC, FAR, and Audit. So Reg is all about tax. BEC, it is about finance, economics, cost accounting, some internal controls, just a lot of extra stuff that they throw into that exam. FAR is all about financial reporting, and Audit is obviously about auditing. So a lot of people think about what order should they take the exams in, and the general idea is that you should take the hardest exam first. So for a lot of people, that's FAR, because that has the most material on it. But for me, even though I had the constraint of the master's program where I knew I was going to take FAR in the spring and Audit in the summer, I knew that I would start with Reg because tax is not my strong suit. So that is the most difficult exam for me. So FAR was one of the more easy exams for me because I was very confident in financial reporting. So I would say that my advice to people who are thinking about what order they want to take the exams, if they don't have any constraints on them at all, is take the most difficult exam for you first, because if you can pass that one, then you don't have to worry about jumping a bigger hurdle in the future. So in order to take the CPA exam, you have to apply to NASBA. So a couple of tips about NASBA is that they take a really long time to process applications. And my first tip would be to give yourself plenty of time when submitting your application. So my application actually took 10 weeks, and I was studying the entire time that I was waiting for my application. I had to send in my transcript a couple of times. They lost it, so it was a little bit of a battle. So you want to make sure you get out ahead of it and apply as soon as possible. The second tip would be that you can save money and schedule multiple exams on the same notice to schedule. Now, a lot of firms, if you're already committed to working at a firm, a lot of firms do pay for the exam. But while I was in grad school, I was still paying for these exams out of pocket until I could really get reimbursed for them from work. So I was trying to save as much money as possible. So if you take multiple exams within 6 months of each other, they're on the same notice to schedule, and you don't have to pay an extra fee, because you have to pay a fee for every notice to schedule that you receive. So if you can take 2 exams in 6 months of each other, I would definitely recommend it. I took BEC and FAR within 6 months of each other. And then the last tip is, no matter what your jurisdiction is, so when you apply, you have to pick which state you want to be licensed in, or just to begin the whole process. But you can take the exams in any state at any test center. So I actually took one of my exams in Worcester, Mass, because it was a busy test taking time, and that was where they had an open seat. So I decided to take my test there. So study budgets. So I put a screenshot on the slide of an Excel file that I had for all of my exams. So I would fill out the expected hours that I wanted to study for each week that I knew I was going to be studying for the exam, and then I would fill it out with the actual hours that I studied. So this was a really good week for me. Not all weeks looked like this, but the goal of this is really to just set reasonable expectations for yourself. And I can't really emphasize reasonable enough, because if you say you're going to study 5 hours a day, like, that's really not reasonable. You can't study for 8 hours a day and make it your full-time job, because you're not going to retain anything. I would suggest tracking your hours, track what you actually do, and study about 1 to 3 hours per day. I would also recommend taking at least 1 day a week off. I didn't really do that very often, and I was burning myself out pretty quickly because I was being very over the top about it because I really wanted to pass. But I would recommend taking at least 1 day off a week. And honestly, you have to make studying a priority, and if you don't make it a priority, then you're not going to pass. I have a lot of friends that were studying alongside me, and they weren't making it a priority like I was, and then they didn't pass. And that's just the truth of the matter. And I was really lucky to have supportive people in my life that knew that I had to make studying a priority. And you're just going to have to say no to friends and family for the X amount of months that you're studying for the CPA exam, because then you have the rest of your life once they're all done. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Wiley. So I used Wiley to study, and in this new master's program, that's what you use to study for the exams. So I'll just talk to you about how I utilized Wiley. So I used the lecture videos, I used the study text, I used the focus notes, I used the flashcards, I used basically everything that Tom sent to me, and all of it was helpful. So I would watch all of the lecture videos and take the quizzes right after the video. And just an FYI to everybody that is going to start taking quizzes, you're going to do terrible on them when you start, because you don't answer enough multiple choice questions in school. You don't practice them enough. So when you take these quizzes, you're not going to do well when you first start, and that's okay, because you just have to keep practicing. I tutored accounting for 4 years, and I still struggled when I was taking these quizzes when I started. But another thing that I would say is, while you're watching the videos, have the study text open. You don't have to read every single word of these 500-page books. That's really not realistic. I would annotate in the study text as I was listening to the video, because that would help me retain the information. So through the rest of the presentation, I'm going to say that I rewrote a lot of things, because rewriting things in a notebook was how I retained information. It helped reinforce concepts to me. So I always had a separate notebook handy, as well as annotating in the study text, because I would rewrite important concepts or problems down in a notebook while I was studying to reinforce the topics. But I won't talk too much about Wiley, because I know Tom's going to talk about that after. So going into multiple choice questions, so some study tips for multiple choice. So multiple choice questions, I think, are the biggest part of studying. You should be taking at least one 30-question cumulative multiple choice question per day every time that you study. And the reason that I say 30 questions is because the real exam, the testlets, are around 30 questions. Some of them are more, none of them are less, actually. So you should be taking 30-question quizzes. If you're taking 20-question quizzes, you're not really doing yourself any justice, because you are practicing, but it's not simulating the length of the testlets that you're going to get on the exam. So I would say taking those every day is really important. Wiley also offers you to choose if you want to take your quizzes in study mode or in exam mode. I am very, very, very pro study mode. When you pick the answer in study mode, it will tell you right away if you got the answer right or wrong, and it will give you an explanation as to why you got it right or why you got it wrong. Exam mode is just the format of the real test. You just pick the question, and it doesn't tell you if you got it right. But for purposes of studying and trying to learn the material, I think it's important to understand why you got the question wrong or why you got it right. So I would have that notebook handy while I was taking quizzes, and during the quizzes, I would actually just take notes after I would answer a question. Sometimes I would actually rewrite the entire problem out, almost as if it were like a homework assignment, so I could redo the entire problem by hand and really just reinforce that into my brain. It does take a lot more work, but I really just wanted to pass them all on the first try. I didn't want to waste any time, because to me, spending all of these hours studying and then not having it be worth it in the end, I'd rather study more than I needed to. So I would use the notebook a lot. This is something, the second to last bullet is read the question stem first. So in the Wiley videos, some of the people that do the lectures talk about, if you have a multiple choice question and you have a paragraph of information, you want to look at what are they actually asking you, because they're probably giving you a bunch of distractor information. I found this a lot with reg and FAR, is they give you all these numbers and they give you all of this information, and you don't need any of it. You just need one piece of it, and you need to figure out what the question's actually asking you. So when you're doing these, when you're answering these questions in study mode, just make sure you're taking your time. I wouldn't worry about how fast you're taking the exams. Just make sure that you are like retaining the information. And overall, just to crush multiple choice questions is really, if you don't have enough time to maybe watch all the videos, you have certain constraints, make sure you're answering multiple choice questions. I tell this to everybody that asks me about what I did when I was studying for the exams, and multiple choice questions are definitely the most important. So for the actual exam for multiple choice, some things that I found are important when you're taking it is flags are your friend. So there's a little flag next to the question, and Wiley has this as well. If you don't know the question right away when you look at it, flag it and move forward. Don't spend a lot of time like waiting to answer a question and trying to hurt your brain so hard because you don't know the answer. Just flag it and then go back to it later and answer everything that you know first. You really have to pace yourself, but also have time management, which kind of seems a little bit silly, but you have 4 hours for the entire exam. So if you have 2 testlets of multiple choice and 3 simulation testlets, you really should be splitting that half and half. For me, simulations took me a lot longer than multiple choice, so I would try to do my multiple choice a little bit faster. But you don't want to spend more than 2 hours on multiple choice questions. Once you pick an answer on the real test, don't go back and change it. Don't look at it again, because you're going to drive yourself crazy and you're going to spend way too much time on one question, and then you're going to run out of time and you're not going to finish the exam because you were worried about one multiple choice question. So I would say really just trust yourself and trust that you've studied enough. This last bullet is if you have a qualitative question, and so that means it's not quantitative, there's no numbers in it, it's just asking you about concepts. If you are truly lost, you have absolutely no idea what the answer to the question is. If there's 4 choices, it's really likely that one choice is slightly different than the others. There's something different about it, and the other 3 have something in common. Pick the outlier and move on. Don't waste a bunch of time on one multiple choice question. And I did have to do that at one point because I really didn't know what they were asking me, and it was my backup plan, and I just went with it. So that's something I would say is a tip. So talking about task-based simulations, so these were definitely my weakness in studying for the exam. Thankfully, I would study with a friend, and she was really, really good at these. So I was good at multiple choice, and she was good at these, and we would learn off of each other. So there are a lot of different types of simulations. So they can be any type of problem. It can be a research question, document review and revision. So you'll have a full document, and you have to edit certain sentences, and you'll have different options on choosing on how to fix the document. Or you'll have to revise financial statements, or do a bank reconciliation, fill in numbers. It really could be anything. And a simulation could take you 10 minutes, or it could take you like 45 minutes. And there's really no knowing what you're going to get on the real exam, so you have to be prepared for anything. So I would say attempt every simulation in Wiley, even though some of them are just really hard, and you're like, I don't know how to do this. Do them in study mode. Flag the ones that you struggle with so you can go back and rewrite them in a notebook and redo them out by hand, so that you can actually understand, like, okay, like this is why this is the answer. They have the explanations there. It's more helpful than just trying to guess and move forward. So it takes a lot more time, but I would rather understand the information than just fly through them. And there's also there's also, I would say, some of the simulations have one question to them, so it actually feels like one question, and some of them have like 4, 5, 6 questions. So you really don't know what you're going to get when you're studying and when you're taking the test. So for exam tips for simulations, the first thing that you should do is when you open the testlet, you should look at all the simulations in your testlet and start with the one that you feel most confident on. If you start with the one that you feel most confident on, it will make you feel a little bit better about yourself, and you will feel like, okay, I actually can do this, and then move on to the ones that are a little bit more challenging. If I saw a research question, I went to that one first because I was like, hopefully this will take me 5 minutes and not 40. So I just went with the one that I felt I would be most confident in. Reading every part of the simulation is really important. They're going to give you a lot of information, but you need to read all of it because one sentence that you miss might be the most important sentence in answering the problem. Exhibits are they're little little pop-ups that you want to open at the top of the problem, and they're basically support that you want to utilize while you're answering the problem. So Wiley has exhibits in their simulation as well. I find that on the true exam, there's a lot more exhibits, and there's just a lot that you need to look at, and you need to really make sure you know how to just understand and analyze things that are given to you versus just reading a question and answering it. Also, don't second guess yourself. Again, I said this with multiple choice questions. You really just need to fill in the blanks of the problem and move forward because, like I said, one simulation could take you 10 minutes, and if you spend too much time on that one and then you get one that's going to take you 45 minutes, you're really not going to be in a good spot by the end of the exam. You get partial credit on the simulations, so again, don't leave anything blank. Just kind of go for it. And during the test, there's, for the research questions, you have to use authoritative literature. So whether it's the Internal Revenue Code or the FASB codification, you can actually use that during your any simulation or multiple choice question. I think for multiple choice, don't quote me on that, but you can use it during your test. So if you really are struggling with something and you think you can look it up in the tax code, and you think, oh, I can actually look this up and use this, don't spend too much time on it because some of it's really confusing. But you can utilize that if you're really lost. So again, just time management as well. It's the whole exam is just time management because you really have to just pace yourself and know how much time you have left and just trust yourself. So some of the final tips that I have, the biggest tip for me was studying with a friend was the best. I studied with my best friend in grad school, and we learned so much from each other. We would take multiple choice quizzes together. We would do simulations together, and we learned so much from each other. Like I said earlier, I was good at multiple choice, and she was good at simulations. So we would give each other like tips, and we would explain like, okay, I think the answer is this, and then she'd say, oh, well, I think it's this, and it's like, well, why do you think it's that way? Just if you talk it out, you can figure a lot out versus just doing it by yourself. I would also do flashcards with her. We would go sit at Starbucks for 3 hours and go through the entire box of flashcards, and we would separate them out into a correct and incorrect pile, and I would just go through the ones that were incorrect like over and over again until I got them right. And I would also just annotate on the flashcards as well. I mean, they're yours to keep, and I would just write all over them because that's how I learned best. The focus notes, which I also put a picture of on the slide, those are like a condensed version of the study text. So I would recommend going through those at least one full time. I always went through them more than that, and I would annotate them as I went through them, take notes, and just really get all of the information in a condensed form in a shorter period of time, as opposed to reading 500 pages of a study text. And I would go through the focus notes before every exam. That day before, I would go through the focus notes like in full. And once I did it for the first one and I ended up passing, I was like, well, now I have to do this for every single exam because I think this is good. This is good juju. I'm going to do it every time. Wiley has practice exams in the software. I would recommend taking all of them at least 2 times. And after you take the exam, go through it and see how you did and take notes on it. Understand why you got things right, why you got things wrong, what do you need to work on. I would make a list of things that I needed to work on after I took a practice exam. And the first time you take a practice exam, you're probably going to do really bad, and it's going to feel really bad, but then you just really know what you have to work on, and you just have to work a little bit harder and brush up on the things that you don't know as well. And when you take a practice exam, like put your phone away and just go in a room, close the door, tell people not to bother you for 3 to 4 hours, however long it takes you, because if they really care about you, they won't talk to you while you're trying to study. And 2 last tips are you cannot cram for the Cpa exam because if you don't give yourself enough time to study, you're probably not going to pass. I know people that have studied in like 2-3 weeks and they've done it, and I don't know how they did it because there's no way I would have been able to do that. And knowing a little bit about everything rather than a lot about one thing is really important because you can get tested on anything. The book for FAR is like this thick. You could get tested on anything in those 600 pages. So knowing a little bit about everything in that book versus knowing a lot about a bank reconciliation, it's a lot more helpful, and it will help you pass the exam. So that's all I have. So in full, those are just my strategies and tips that I would say on how to study and how to kind of conquer the CPA exam when you're taking it. So does anybody have any questions, or are we going right to Tom? I don't know what the... Okay, we'll go right to Tom. Sounds good. It's right here. Yes.
Apparently I was supposed to speak into the mic, so we'll do it again. My question was, when you were in grad school, you were taking the exam, did you find that your course load either enhanced what you were studying or that it was such that it allowed you to study?
I think it was very helpful being in grad school at the same time because you're already in some study mode. And one specific class was governmental accounting and accounting because there's a lot of it in FAR. And I didn't know anything about it before I took the class in grad school. And thank God I did because I was able to help other people once I finally understood what I was doing. And I had a lot of practice in wiring the government department. So I was really grateful that I had done it while just taking the class and didn't have to do much. So I would say if anybody has the opportunity to do it while they're in school, they should because you're already in like academic mode versus being at work and working a 10 to 12 hour day and then going home and having to study. That's something I didn't want to do that. So.
In any case.
So welcome one and all. Here is our agenda for my brief bit, and we're going to talk about why certification, because we're not limiting this discussion to, I can't pull this out. We're not limiting the discussion to CPA. We're also talking about CMA a little bit. And rather than discuss the merits of one over the other, I think we'll just discuss the merits of certification. The fact of the matter is that with certification, you are going to be able to leverage your accounting degree and make more money. So that's what this is about. And probably have better looking children as well. All right, so certification helps you get hired, you earn more money, and it keeps you current. It does force you to stay current because there are rules about continuing education. And because you are certified, you will want to stay current. It's a very virtuous cycle. Personal cash flow. So steps to becoming a CPA. All of these certifications have some form of the 3 E's. So education, exam, and experience. And we'll cover those individually as we talk about the different certifications. So with education on the CPA, it's fairly simple until you get into the weeds. Each of the states or jurisdictions that issue CPA licenses have a slightly different idea about what constitutes minimum requirements. What is consistent from every state and every jurisdiction, all 55 of them, is 150 hours, the equivalent of semester hours, are required to apply for your license. Until you get there, however, you can sit for the exam, you can gain your experience, and then when you are ready, when you have the 150 hours, you can apply for your license. Now, it's very efficient if you're doing it the way Samantha did, where you're actually doing 2 things, maybe even working, 2 things at once, with both gaining the semester hours that are required to 150 and studying for the exam. So that's a real efficient way of doing it. Plus, you can leverage your academics because the exam, both of them, are fairly academic in nature. To a large degree, the further you get away from your academic career, the harder these exams are to study for a variety of reasons. We were talking about that a little earlier today. But so 150 hours to apply for your license. All of the Northeast states will actually allow you to start sitting for the exam with 120 hours and a bachelor's degree. So you can have more than 120, of course, but 120 is the minimum. In New Hampshire, quick raise of hands. How many people plan to kind of live, stay, work in New Hampshire? All right, so most of you. Okay, so in New Hampshire, you have to have your bachelor degree conferred with your final transcripts before you can actually apply and sit for the exam. Some other states, for example, Massachusetts to the south, actually allows you to start 3 months before you graduate. So every state, again, might have potentially different requirements in that regard. Experience, we're not going to talk too much about experience because once you start working on the CPA or the CMA, you are going to get a job and you will accrue the experience. So suffice to say for the CPA in New Hampshire, and again this can vary slightly by state, most states are looking for the equivalent of 1 year of public accounting experience. If you don't think you have or you don't want to work in public accounting, there are workarounds for that. There really is no reason to not do the CPA because you're worried about an experience level. The NASBA actually has some fairly innovative programs in place in order to make sure that anybody who wants to can get a CPA. So the experience piece is not something you need to overly sweat. So the exam, as Samantha pointed out, is actually 4 exams. So truth in advertising, it's like a Ukrainian Easter egg. So, hey, it's 1 exam. No, it's not. It's 4. And then when you sit down and take the exam, yay, it's 1 exam. No, it's not. It's 5. So actually, each exam within the 4 exams have 5 testlets, which Samantha alluded to. And each of these testlets are really mini exams that you budget your way through the 4-hour process with. And I'll show that to you here in a little bit. So the application process, I just want to spend a couple of quick seconds on this. Everybody starts at the same place. So when you're applying for the CPA exam, your first stop is NASBA.org. So NASBA, what is NASBA? Well, NASBA is the National Association of State Board of Accountancies. And all of the Northeast states are what we affectionately call NASBA states, meaning they have contracted out the Board of Accountancies in these states with NASBA to handle the application process. And so you're actually, when you're applying, even though your license is going to come from your state, when you're applying, you're actually working through NASBA, sending your paperwork, doing your electronic application, conversing with the people down in Tennessee at CPA Exam Services. So this is the place where you start. The application process typically is supposed to take about 4 weeks. So from the time you submit your electronic application, and you have your transcripts in place, should be about a 4-week process. Now, the problem with states like New Hampshire is that because if you are graduating with a bachelor's degree, you cannot start until you have that bachelor's degree. There is a pig through a python type of process here when everybody's applying at the same time. Everybody. At like the end of May, beginning of June. So as a result, if you're applying in states like that, Connecticut's also the same way, you are going to run into a backlog of applications that you have to, they will work through. It takes a little bit longer. So you do have to kind of plan that or think about that as part of your exam process. What you don't want to do is wait until you get your notice to schedule before you start studying. You heard Samantha talk about the 8 or 10 weeks that she was waiting for her notice to schedule. She was studying because your notice to schedule has a very finite lifetime. It's only good for 6 months. Now, you can move whatever you've applied for within that 6 months. You can schedule it, reschedule it. But when the 6 months are up and you're not done, you have to reapply, repay, and start over. So you don't really want to do that. You really only want to bite off as much as you can chew. So that's what your notice to schedule looks like. It's a purple arrow. When you put in your application, you kind of lose control of when you're going to get your notice to schedule, but you will want to call CPA Exam Services periodically. Probably recommend once a week just to make sure that everything's copacetic and they're working their way, that they have everything they need and they're working their way through your application. Then, when you pass the first one, whichever one that is, you start the dreaded 18-month time clock. And the 18-month time clock really revolves around the fact that every CPA passing score for each of the 4 sections has its own 18-month expiration. So from the day you pass it, and there's a little variability by states, but let's just say it's 18 months. It's never less. So from the day you pass it, it will go away. It will die. It will rot like fish and bananas after 18 months. And if you lose it without getting all 4 done in a rolling 18-month period, you will need to retake whatever you've lost. So an easy way to visualize this is this orange arrow is a conveyor belt. And the conveyor belt moves at the speed of time. And when you pass one, the first one, whichever one that is, it goes on the conveyor belt. Chugga, 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 chugga. And it starts moving to its 18-month expiration. So your job is to get the next 3 on that conveyor belt before the first one falls off. And it is eminently doable, but I think you really have to be honest with yourself, like Samantha was talking about, and do the most difficult one for you first, so that it only gets easier after that, relatively speaking. Now, planning this out can be a formidable exercise. So you look at that and you go, oh my gosh, 20 months out of my life, I have to plan that out, and you will, if you're smart, day in and day out. So how do I do that? Well, I would encourage you, if you're not ready to buy the software yet, or even if you're going to use different software, and this goes for the CMA and the CPA, is you can sign up for a free trial and use the software planning, the exam planning software. And so you put in your start date, your end date, how many hours a day you want to study, which days a week you want to study, and it will build a very granular schedule for you that shows you exactly what you need to do each day, and then you will go ahead and stay on budget. Or if you're not, you will know where you're short. So each of these little squares that you see, black squares, red squares, those are all the Wiley bite-sized lessons. And the real strength of our software is that the bite-sized lessons are easier to learn from, but most importantly, they're easy to study with because they're all relatively short, 30 to 45 minutes, easy to schedule, and easy to stay on track. And every one of the bite-sized lessons has the same components. They've got videos, they've got the study guides, you can take notes, they have flashcards, quizzes that are very tight with the bite-sized lessons. And you can see here, this is a screenshot of the syllabus from auditing. And if you look down the estimated time, look across the columns, you see the estimated time. You can see each of these little modules here, different lengths. We have one at 12 minutes, one at 27 minutes, another one at 12 minutes, another one at 28 minutes. Those are all bite-sized lessons. So really concentrated chunks of information that you can work your way through systematically. All right, which order should you take the parts? I think we've already decided that you should take the most difficult one for you first. And one of the things to keep in mind is I would urge you not to default to one that you think you can pass. Just last night I was down in Massachusetts at a university, and we had a couple people in the room who were taking the exam, and one had started with FAR and one had started with BEC. And I asked the one if he wouldn't mind sharing why he started with BEC, and I go, well, it's like, yeah, maybe it's like the easiest one. And that's probably not the right approach, because what we found out from research and actual statistical analysis of about 5 years of data, that was actually done by a professor down at Bryant University, that this was the most, on average, expeditious way through the exam. From the time a person passed their first exam, if it was FAR, it took an average of 9 months to pass the next 3. So no danger for the vast majority of people who did this to run out of 18 months worth of time. On the other hand, people who did it in this order, the average amount of time was 16 months. So if you think average, think bell-shaped curves, think really large standard deviations, there's a lot of people going beyond 18 months. And that's the danger. When you start losing these, you got to restudy, rebuy, reschedule, everything. All right, what's in the exam? I won't get into this too much, but it is pretty self-explanatory. The topics themselves are part of the AICPA exam blueprints. It's a very lightweight 100-page document that pretty much everybody uses as a guide for the topics that are in the exam. It actually is a worthwhile read because it'll go through each of the topics and the subtopics and give you representative tasks that will be tested and the level at which those exam tasks are tested. So some are easier, some are harder. The harder ones tend to give you more points. The easier ones tend to, well, be easier. But knowing what you're going to get in each of the exams is a big benefit. It's kind of, when you're studying, it's kind of transparent because while we label the questions hard, medium, or easy, you really don't pay that much attention as you're working through and you're actually studying. All right, so this is what the exam structure looks like. All of the exams are 4 hours. All of them have 5 testlets. All of them start with multiple choice testlets. You get one testlet at a time. You don't see anything else. You work your way through the first testlet. You can take as much time as you want on each testlet, but when the 4 hours is up, you're done. So you really do have to budget your time actively as you're going from testlet to testlet. Now, multiple choice questions are multiple choice questions, but when you're working through the questions, we recommend that your target is 1.5 minutes per question. And as you work through the testlets, as Samantha said, the testlets are, there's actually four different types of testlets. And some can take as little as 10 minutes, some can take as many as 45 minutes. So as you open up those testlets, you have to recognize what you have and actively budget your time accordingly in each of the testlets. So final steps. These are the pass rates for each of the respective 4 sections for 2018 and 2019. And they're actually fairly consistent. Reg actually is a little higher this year, 56% versus 53% last year. But this is fairly consistent. It's been kind of in that 50-ish range if you take them all 3 and clump them together. The only outlier here is BEC, and that's, we won't get into the discussion there, but if you have any questions about that, I'd love to share my thoughts with you on that. But by and large, let's call it 50%. Does that mean that half of the people in this room are destined to fail the exam on each section they take? No. Doesn't mean that at all. The actual pass rate has nothing to do with how well you do because it is not curved. The exam is not predetermined how many people are going to pass or fail. There's lots of different types of test takers in here. There are domestic test takers, there are foreign test takers, there are retest takers, which actually have lower pass rates than first-time test takers. There are people who are 45 years old in here, which have lower pass rates than people who are 23 years old, which have higher pass rates. So the pass rate really doesn't mean anything other than to scare you. Your pass rate is a direct proportion of the amount of time you're going to spend to study. Sam, Exhibit A. One thing we do know, though, is that the sooner you do this in proximity to your academic career, statistically speaking, the higher the pass rate is. This has been the same for all the years I've been looking at it as NASBA reports it, and it doesn't change much. From that area, and we're looking at ages here, but it's not really about age, is it? It's about proximity to your academic career. But if you're within 2 years of your academic career, your statistics of passing the exam are like 62% pass rate versus just a few years later, it drops down into the mid-40s and stays that way for a long time until it gets worse. So don't wait. Do it as soon as you can, not before you're ready, but as soon as you can. Okay, the CMA designation. A lot of what we covered, a lot of what we talked about, study tips, they translate pretty well across both of the sections. The IMA, we've already talked a little bit about the IMA. The CMA, the IMA is a non-governmental organization that's really dedicated to enhancing and raising the profile of managerial accounting, managerial cost accounting. And with that aim, it's a universal, global, should we say, certification that's good wherever you practice. Where do they work? Well, everywhere where there's money. And every company potentially needs one. And even though your aunt may not know what a CMA is, everybody who works in accounting that runs a business does. And so it's kind of a little bit, this is changing, a little bit of the stepchild of the accounting world. It just doesn't have the number of members that CPA is, but it's growing very rapidly. And interestingly enough, I've been in the certification field for about 12 years now, and even as recently as 5 or 6 years ago, we used to tell people that you should really consider public accounting first, because that's where the entry-level salaries are going to be the highest, and that's where the most of the opportunities are, at least right out of school. That has changed. It really doesn't matter anymore. It matters more about what you think you want to do. If you want to work in industry and you don't want to work in public accounting, then the CMA is the ticket for you. So it really gives you a lot more flexibility, I think, from a career planning standpoint. I think it's also suffice to say that the salaries are very similar across all age groups, no matter what certification you have. So if somebody says, well, the CPA is going to make more than the CMA or vice versa, the data no longer backs that up. It's pretty even. The requirements. First of all, you got to know accounting. That's the first bullet point. Whether that's through a formal education or through after-school studying, you will have to have a sufficient knowledge of finance, cost and managerial, and a little bit of tech in there as well. You have to pass both CPA exam parts. So one of the bonuses for the CMA exam, unlike the CPA exam, is the CMA is 2 exams. And the CPA, of course, is 4. Did I say that right? CMA is 2 and the CPA is 4. So the CMA does not have an audit component, and it does not have a tax component. So I'm going to really, really terribly simplify this. The CMA, it has a cost and managerial component, and it has a financial management and planning component. So those are more or less the 2 sections. You need a bachelor's degree. It can be in accounting, or it can be in finance, or it can be in business administration. It's really not a specific requirement, but you do need a bachelor's degree, and you do have to get that within a certain amount of time after you get your after you pass the exam. 2 years of professional work experience, which is very flexible, and of course you have to be a member in IMA because they're the ones that give you the CMA certification. The windows are a little different, where the CPA is working towards continual testing, and that actually may come later this year, where there are no closed windows. You can test 364 or 5 days out of the year. The CMA has 2 months on and 2 months off. So the windows are a total of 6 months that are available through the year to test. Where you test is the same place for the CPA and the CMA. Those are prometric test centers, brick and mortar test centers. The closest one to here is probably up in Concord. And you do have to schedule online for those. Pretty straightforward once you get your notice to schedule, or in the case of the IMA, your approval for your application. Part 1, you can take these in any order. So we talk about Part 1 and Part 2, but they don't have to be studied in that order. They don't have to be taken in that order. Interestingly enough, the Part 1 has a slightly lower pass rate than Part 2. don't really know why. I don't think it's any more difficult. But what we find, I think, the IMA, I think, has basically surmised that more people will take part one first, and just taking that one first tends to maybe weed people out just a little bit. So by the time they get to part two, they're a little more serious. They study a little harder. They maybe do all of the questions and eventually have a little higher pass rate. The pass rate is slightly higher than the CPA exam in the United States. If you take out, especially the Middle East and Africa, the CMA is about 50-ish% on part one and about 60% on part two. So for what it's worth, I would say comparable level of difficulty. So this is part one, pretty heavy in cost and managerial with some ethics and technology. Part two, financial planning, decision making, and management performance. Each of these exams are 4 hours. There's 100 multiple choice questions and 2 essays. The interesting thing about the CMA exam, which isn't typical of these high stakes financial exams, is that you kind of know how you're doing if they let you go from the multiple choice to the essays, because you have to get at least 50% on the multiple choice in order to move on to the essay. So, and that's because mathematically your chance of passing is 0 if you get 49% on the multiple choice. Multiple choice is 75% of the exam, and the essay is 25% of the exam. Membership fees. You can see the student fees are considerably less, so it does pay to consider doing this as you are a student. You can actually start the exam as a student. You don't need your degree to start the exam. And there is a scholarship available, and Micheline West, Professor West, I believe is volunteered just this night to manage the dispensation of those scholarships. The scholarship is really cool because it allows you a cost-free path to sit for the CMA exam. And so it pays for your, look over here, everything in that column, everything in that student column, it pays for all of that, plus you get a free Wiley test bank for the CMA. And you do have to start within a year. You do have to be a student when you get your scholarship. But if you are serious about doing the CMA, the scholarship, if you qualify vis-a-vis going to meet with Micheline West, and she has some available, is really pretty simple. There are no essays involved. There's no mission statement involved. There's no personal viewpoint thing involved. Like all these scholarship things you filled out in your earlier days, it's basically you going to Professor West and saying, I really want to do the CMA exam within a year. And then Micheline West will sort through and figure out how many people she can give the scholarship to. Every school is allowed 10 per year. So if you're interested in that, and you all know Micheline West, correct? Micheline? All right. All right. Excellent. Thank you, Professor West. So with that, I'll turn it back over to our MC, and I will just reemphasize, certification is where it's at. Get certified, leverage your accounting degree, make more money. Thank you.
Okay, does anyone have any questions for either Tom or Samantha or me or anyone else? All right, well, I want to say thank you to both Samantha Samantha and Tom for coming and speaking tonight, and to SNHU for hosting this event. So again, thank you both. And one thing about the student membership, if you actually, they are, if you will, they're running a promotion. Unfortunately, it's only through the end of February, where it's actually only $25 to join as a student member with the IMA. One final thing before we go is just want to let you guys know that we do have a session coming up in April. It's going to be out at in the Pease Center at the I'm just trying to remember where, the UNH Professional Development Center out there in Peace. However, we do have a June session coming up on ethics. It's usually very well attended right here. It's actually at the Puritan here in Manchester. It's a lot of fun. That's actually on the 2nd of June. So if you guys have any questions, I want to say thank you very much and have a good night.